Welcome to Conversations on Leadership with Dr. Dave, where we're on a mission to answer 4 questions from some of the best leaders and leadership minds in the country. So with us, we're pleased to have our featured special guest this week, Tim Nowak. Welcome, Tim.
Hey, Dave. How you doing?
Hey, great. How about yourself? Glad you're here.
Yeah, appreciate being here. Thank you.
So introduce yourself to our listeners, a little bit about your background, who you are, what you do. Basically, just give us the whole scoop on Tim.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. So I'm Tim Nowak. I'm in Green Bay, Wisconsin, but I've had a chance to live and work all throughout the country over the past decade or so. I've been involved in the fire and EMS industry, which is kind of where I hail from. Been in the industry for a bit over 20 years now, working in a number of roles from, responding firefighter and EMT and paramedic, all the way through company officer, chief officer, even as a consultant, working in the software field now, and also consulting as well independently. So pretty much, anything, especially related to EMS, if there's a role or responsibility, I've probably had my hand in it or filled it or did something within the industry.
Gotcha. Well, tell us about some of the maybe some of the leadership roles that you've had, or maybe some of the ones where you've been one of the responders and had some less than stellar, or maybe there are some stellar examples above you.
Yeah. Working in the response world, supervision and management leadership comes in a lot of different shapes and forms. Sometimes it's just a crew of 2 people. And so, working with someone who typically would have, junior experience, less experience, or tenure. And so working as like a company officer, we would call it, overseeing them and being, somewhat of a mentor in a sense too, depending on how much experience they have. So, certainly filling that role, but then also on the higher end, I was like an executive level chief officer, large county-based agency, 150 or so employees. I was toward the top end of the food chain, so like a number 4 in command, essentially of the department, and
Nice.
Oversaw a separate division or group within the organization. I think our entire operating budget was somewhere around 23 or 24 million. I directly oversaw about 2.5 to 3 million of that, and in a few employees, some subordinates to go with it too. So. Variety, everything from, like I said, one person oversight to a larger group, and then just, having some leadership and thought leadership, I guess, in the social media world, but some experience there, mentoring others and trying to, be a positive, realistic, but a positive voice within the industry.
Nice. Well, and it's good to see that in the industry. Like I said, especially on the EMS, sometimes that when you're looking at the list of first responders, like I said, sometimes you hear the police and fire quite a bit, but I would say over the last couple of years, it really started to, people just, police, fire, and EMS, you really start to, get a lot more recognition than it used to for either cross-trained dual role or single role EMS agencies.
Yeah, there certainly is. And one of the things that kind of lingers over our industry is a term of being called an essential service. Now, that term got thrown out quite a bit in COVID for a number of different jobs. And I'm not trying to downplay any of those different, roles.
Oh, no, I completely understand.
Yeah, like, a grocery store is absolutely essential. Like you need it. Within our industry, that term means something a little bit different. And what's unique is that, like, every state typically requires that a community has some sort of police force or presence or contract or something. And same thing with fire services. With ambulance services, believe it or not, most states do not have any requirement that there even is ambulance services at the community level.
Wow.
And if and that's we're speaking at least statutorily. Now, that's not to say that there are many places that don't have it, but by having it, it certainly doesn't mean that it has to come in a fast or rapid time frame, and it certainly doesn't mean that it has to be funded to any sort of level or capacity. It's just a paper gold star pat in the back in a lot of places. So it's an unfunded mandate, basically.
Gotcha. Well, I wasn't familiar with that in a lot of other states. I'm, hail from Virginia. So, I mean, obviously I'm more familiar with Virginia than anywhere else, but, had some dealings with West Virginia and Maryland. And I know in Virginia, I believe it is a statutory mandate to provide, at least city level, county level EMS services, or contract to, or at least have something. A lot of them, well, they range from, we have our own, uber robust department like Fairfax County, or you end up with rural county that's like, well, we kind of wash our hands of it. We leave it to the volunteer rescue squad.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then at that point, it's kind of like, and I remember working for a company that contracted out services to one particular county, and it basically, they were doing the best they can, but the volunteers just could not keep up.
Yeah.
And I think finally the surrounding jurisdictions just had throw their hands in the air and said, look, we're not sending mutual aid anymore.
Mm-hmm.
We'll respond, half mile into the county for something, or unless it's a major incident response. But beyond that, we're not just sending routine mutual aid for, a sick person.
Yeah.
So they finally, between the no mutual aid and the company that was trying to get the contract, reminding the county board of supervisors that, hey, there is a statutory mandate. At least they relented to, okay, well, maybe 24/7 coverage isn't the worst thing in the world. So at least contract to staff up one unit for the center of the county to at least tell people we have something.
Yeah. And sometimes that's all it is, it might be a 30-minute ride, but on paper it's there. So,
you're correct.
And every place is different. With that regard, at least. But so it's leadership and management and all those elements look a bit different in the industry. But it's nice that there's opportunity for smaller. If a big group, a large organization is not your thing, I mean, you can still be a leader on a smaller level and have a really big impact, especially on an individual basis with other people you work with, other coworkers.
Oh, absolutely. And we were, I was interviewing a gentleman the other day about different, leadership opportunities. And one of the things we were talking about nonprofit boards more specifically, but we were just talking about, leadership in a volunteer organization in general. Mm-hmm. I mean, when you don't have that, carrot or stick to, I could stand in between you and your paycheck, which is kind of the lowest level of leadership according to Maxwell's 5 levels. But, if you don't have that stick or carrot, he's talked about it's just pure leadership. I mean,
yeah, and that's what's unique, especially within my industry too, is fireside and EMS or ambulance service side. There are certainly a significant handful of nonprofit 501c3 type organizations. Some are small and some are massive. And then, there's also for-profit industry, and there's public, municipal, or even county or tax-based and regional. So there's the whole gamut of organizational types. And so, there's an element of creativity and customization you've got to have within each one of them. And, tailoring to the audience, volunteers versus part-time versus career staff people, certainly, working with any one of those types of employees, because they're still technically employees in a sense for us. Navigating and managing them is different on the personnel management spectrum, but also still very similar. I might hold a little bit more of a stronger stance when it comes to volunteers in my industry. The fact that you're a volunteer, I mean, it's good and thank you, but I don't think that you should be treated any differently than a career person. And for some people, that may not be something they're willing to hear or tolerate. So it is what it is.
Exactly. I remember years ago, because I originally from the Hampton Roads area, Norfolk, Virginia Beach, that kind of stuff. And obviously for ages, Virginia Beach was the largest all-volunteer rescue squad system in the country. Eventually, they said they just got to the point they could not handle the call volume with the growth. I mean, and I certainly understand it. They still got a robust volunteer system, but I remember the switch, and I don't remember the year, but you always heard a lot of, and it was unfortunate, but I respected the way they did their stance, and then they let people make the decision. It was a whole lot of, yeah, I'm not doing that. What are you going to do? Take another zero out of my check? And then they kind of went to the creed that you only volunteer twice. Once when you sign up and once when you leave.
Mm.
And beyond that, like you said, just treat you like another employee, respect, but accountability.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay, I get it. Here's what we demand. Here's what we're offering. And like it or lump it, take it or leave it, but just kind of is what it is. And at least it was a nice bit of professionalism to say, hey, it's no harm, no foul if you don't want to do what we're asking.
Yeah.
But if you're going to be here,
Well, and I think that's one of the challenges and one of the kind of threats in a sense within the industry that I've got is this isn't volunteering to work at the concession stand for your kids, baseball, soccer, football game. That type of volunteering is entirely different than volunteering to be a licensed, credentialed care provider on an ambulance. I mean, if you're associating the two together as equals, I think you've got a mismatch in your prioritization. And so if the open-ended threat is there of, well, what are they going to just do? Take away another zero. Well, yeah. I mean, I would have no problem removing someone from a roster that doesn't want to comply with what is required. And the way, the citizens at least should think of it too is that whether it's a volunteer, a career, or a multi-gajillionaire paid person, they still expect a competent person to be there that follows the rules, meets the expectations, and shows up and performs regardless of the pay. And the volunteers have it harder because they're not getting paid or minimal compensation at best, but they still have to maintain that same standard. And if you're not willing to do that, then the door is over there. You can leave, and I wouldn't look back.
Yeah, no, I agree with that 100%. Like I said, the when you're having the worst day of your life and you call somebody, you expect somebody to show up that's going to be, like I said, knowledgeable and professional, and like you said, do the job, and look like they're supposed to be there.
Yeah,
I do understand people responding in a POV. I get it, but at least to some degree of professionalism. And like I said, if they don't want to do it, fine. They do want to do it. Hey, that's fantastic. But you're right. One thing I'd love to touch back on is I love how you put. It's a different type of volunteering. It's not, all right, once a year we do the United Way Day of Caring. We go out and help build a habitat house, or, we go out and I help at the local soup kitchen once a month or something to that degree. It's not the same. It's just not the same.
No, it certainly isn't. And, again, like a patient with chest pain doesn't change, or a heart attack doesn't change just because you're a volunteer. And, or a structure fire in a 2-story, 3-bedroom residence doesn't change just because you're a volunteer. No, it is what it is. And the factors are going to be there. So you don't get it easier just because you're volunteer. So yeah, tailoring to the audience, it can certainly be challenging, especially when you've got a mix. And I've seen that in a lot of departments where I've either worked or done consulting is, when there's a mix of the two, it's very hard to integrate that mix. But from what I've at least experienced, it's important to make sure that you maintain consistency with how you as a leader, or you more importantly as a manager, interact and operate. Because if you allow for something on the volunteer level but don't allow on the career level, it gets ugly and fast. And so, differentiating between the two is allowed to a certain extent, but after some point in time, you have to treat everyone really equally, even though equitably they are different. Equality probably has to reign when it comes to leadership, with a lot within my industry.
Yeah, no, I would agree with that 100%, because I've seen some accommodation departments integrate very well, but I've also seen that that's almost the exception and not the rule in some cases. that, like I said, sometimes there is a great connection, and sometimes there can be, the worst type of knocking heads.
Yeah.
And so you're right. If you're from an employee standpoint, if you can, treat everybody as, close as possible. Like you said, okay, these guys may be working 24s, and okay, the volunteers come in and do a 10 or a 12 or something like that. I totally get it.
Yeah.
But you're right. The more fair you can make it, obviously the better it is. And hopefully, like I say, it goes back to good leadership, that they can actually try to set up a good structural system to where, and I'm not talking about like election type, but just the politics of the organization.
Yeah.
A lot of times can get sometimes pretty nasty. And like I said, I started in a system back in the early 90s with they had a fantastic auxiliary supplement, right? And so it integrated very well. And then I've seen some places that didn't. And then, like I said, you got cities like, from where I was at, Norfolk and Portsmouth, then some of the bigger cities that they're all career just from, from their inception, so it's, had an interesting mix in a heterogeneous area. But I wanted to jump into the first question and say, what does leadership mean to you, and what does good leadership look like?
Yeah. And I'm going to take a little bit of a different spin on this, if you don't mind.
Oh, cool.
And for
no, please.
For some it may be a little bit controversial, but I'm okay with that. I've heard a lot about leadership and good leadership, and we want to be a leader, not a manager, and all that other kind of stuff. And I'm kind of calling BS to some of it in a sense. Leadership and good leadership to me is being a good manager. And so I put management before leadership, because if you're a good manager, you're going to be a good leader. So good management breeds good leadership. And from that sense, you don't have to be a titled manager, a titled supervisor, but you can still manage in a sense, whether it's crew management or task management, whatever your assignment is, doing your job, doing it well, holding yourself accountable and holding others accountable. That's good management, but that's good leadership. So I am trying to emphasize more that management is not a bad term. When used and done correctly and well, management is good. And I would rather work for a good manager, because they're going to be a good leader, than someone who is just a good leader but sucks at being a manager. So it's very hard to find a good manager that's a bad leader, but it's easier to find a good leader who's not a good manager. So I rather focus my attention on, let's do the job well, lead by example, be accountable, and that is leadership.
No, it's funny. I agree 100%. One of the talks that I do, I talk about, and just in general, I talk about management being more of a skill set. People, like I said, you have all the memes out there, leader good, manager bad, the drill. They're all over LinkedIn. You can't, on Facebook, you can't swing a dead cat and not hit something to that effect. And everyone's, oh yeah, 100%. Yeah. I love the leaders, screw the managers. It's like, stop.
Yeah.
You could have the most visionary leader. Hey, this is where we want to go. This is amazing. But I take it back to, with it being a skill set, back to the scientific management days back in the 20s. I'm not trying to get overly academic, although, to a certain degree, guilty as charged. But there's one model that just really stood out. This guy Gulick had an acronym for management, POSITIVE Corp, right? It stood for, well, what's the role of the chief executive? What's the role of now we call it a manager, or today we probably call it a leader, but the terminology wasn't the same back then. And he just had a list. It was an acronym. It was like planning, organizing, staffing, directing, coordinating, reporting, and budgeting. And it's kind of like, well, okay, you got this great visionary guy that's got these wonderful ideas, and you're going to run a nonprofit. You can't staff it, or you can't, keep to budget, or you can't plan your way out of a wet paper bag. You suck, to your point. Could you be exceptional at all those things and still be a jerk and a quote unquote bad leader? Well, of course you can.
Yeah.
There's people that are efficient but you're right. If you're got the quote leadership traits, and then you are just horrible at these skill sets. At some point, I might like you, Tim. You're a great guy, man, but God, every time you come around this place, you're running this place, and it's a circus.
Yeah.
And at some point, nobody wants the goat rope and the 3-ring circus, and they're like, "Man, I'll just go somewhere else."
Yeah, and it comes down at that point to execution, where you can have all the greatest ideas in the world, and there's a role for people, and there's a place for people that are just idea people, and that's what they do is they come up with ideas, and then you have someone else who can figure out the cogs and the movement and the math and whatever else to make it work, the operations like that. That's okay. Businesses operate that way, but they operate because they have good managers who can actually execute and perform. So that's to me, what it is the hype around being a leader over a manager. Like I don't buy it. I try to emphasize, be a good manager. There's nothing wrong with being a good manager because you will become a good leader.
Yeah. And I mean, I've discussed it a couple of times before where you're an effective manager, like you said, to your point, that can execute on the plan, that can get things done, but, also that displays or some of these leadership characteristics or leadership traits, in the meantime, because like I said, you have to have that skill set or, nothing's going to happen. You can't get things done. At some point, you're out of business or, out of a job, or like I said, people are just going to up and leave because, people like clarity. And a lot of times if you can't do those items, if you can't execute on things, it's just a big confusing mess, and and there is no clarity, and it just frustrates people. Yeah,
absolutely, I agree.
Yeah, you talk about employee. I talk a lot about employee engagement and the cost of disengaged employees. Just because of the productivity. But I'm sure, especially it could be private, it could be municipal, it could be whatever. But it's just some people that are in EMS that aren't happy campers for whatever reason with their organization, their leader, their whatever. There's a million ways to slow roll clear for a next call.
Yeah,
or dragging it out through a day on a transport truck where it's all right. Well, we're going to slow roll this thing and maybe get 3 or 4 in today instead of 7 or 8.
Yeah, and a lot of that comes down to the lack of structure within organizations, and I think this is pretty universal where it's not just my industry, but it's industries all over the place. And I've worked for corporations and companies. And when there's a lack of accountability and a lack of structure, I'm not saying micromanagement, and I'm not saying, discipline to the point of you must do this. Like, no, that's not the point. But when there's not a flow, there's not a chain of command of sort, there's not a structure in place of who do you report to, who's in charge of this, who's responsible to get this done, who's accountable for it. If you don't have that, organizations fall apart. And regardless of the industry, if you don't have some structure in place, organizations fall apart. And, and I hear this a lot with the younger generations and blah, blah. They don't want to do this. Well, more than likely, when that's the response from people, oh, the younger generation, this, I call BS to an extent. Likely it's your organization that is not providing the structure that they probably need. And manage them because guess what? Good management is good leadership. So
yeah. No, I agree with that 100%. And you're right. What have we done on our end? Like I said, it's an easy excuse. All those millennials, all the Gen Z, all the new kids coming out, blah, blah, like you said. Yeah. What have you done to onboard them, train them, adapt to what, to resource them up, to give them what they need to properly be able to do the job?
Yeah.
How clear are you on your expectations and what needs to be done? And like I said, how well can you manage them?
Well,
100%.
And on top of that, I always chuckle too, because, we bash now on the Gen Zs. It used to be bashing on millennials. Well, I'm a millennial. I'm 40 years old. So I'm the older end of the millennials. But the people who were bashing on millennials, were 20 years older. And the people who are now bashing on the Zennials or whatever the heck we're dealing with now, are 20 years older. So if you're 20 years older than those people or 30 years older, you're their parent. So So if you've got a workforce that is doing so horrible that they can't function without this and can't follow direction and can't follow whatever, who who taught them? Well, I mean,
Exactly.
was it you as the parent, or was it, shipping them off to daycare or a school system or whatever else? And we can go on probably about a whole bunch of other stuff. But okay, look at yourself first before you start bitching about these people, because you're the first line of accountability for this incompetent 17-year-old who can't do anything besides look at their phone. Well, what did you show them that was different? You were the parent. Someone was the parent. So let's start there. If there's a problem with the issue, the generation.
Yeah. Oh, 100%. And you're right. It's I've seen way too many people fuss about that and not have done anything when the people first come in. Like I said, to train them, to orient them, to resource them, to put them with a good mentor. I mean, don't get me wrong. You get the occasional, and it's like in any industry, but you get the occasional guy or gal that just come out of paramedic school and that walks on water and can do no wrong and knows everything. I mean, there are those out there, so I'm not going to deny that. And every once in a while, kind of getting them settled and realizing that maybe not know as much as they think. But most people, like, what is their experience? Where did they come from? How can you help them get into the industry and actually thrive and figure out what's expected? Because the circumstances have changed. If you're not having a whole bunch of I'm Gen X myself, and so it's kind of like if you're not going to have a whole lot of brand new entry level older millennial Gen X people, right? Okay, these are the workforce you're having to, this is the hand you've been dealt. Okay, then you might want to, God forbid, learn a little bit more about them and figure out how to better train, equip, and onboard them than, because it's not going to change. It's not going to quote unquote get any better if you put it that way. The good old days probably weren't really that good anyway, but I think the time on end, they've been people have been fussing about the generations coming behind them as being, I mean, for Socrates and Plato, hey, they don't, these darn kids, right? Don't respect it. I mean, it's been for thousands of years we've been fussing about that.
Yeah, and if that's the reality, well, then we allowed it. So who's really to blame?
Yeah, and as leaders, what are we doing? What are we going to do about it? Yeah. I mean, like, to your point, you got to manage, you got to execute on it, you got to do something, and you have to maintain a workforce. And at some point, what are you going to do to make that happen? Although I will say there's one thing talking about almost like feeling like the parent, that there is it's like a supply demand curve. There's like this point, right? When you realize that that was very, I won't say strange, I won't say difficult, I'll say interesting. When you realize that the folks coming in, I'll just use the example of the kid paramedic school that knows it all. It's funny when you get into that discussion, you realize, I've been doing this longer than you've been on God's green earth.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, that's an interesting threshold when the new folks coming in right out of school. Like I said, you're like,
no, absolutely. I mean, if I think back of when I started my first career, I did 10 or 11 years with that organization. I've been out of it now for almost 10 years. So had I stuck around with that place and just rode out through the ranks, like, I would have been pretty close to a captain or something, whatever they're now with them. And I remember, I started my job very young. I was 20. And, I remember having a battalion chief say to me, I got more time in front of this urinal, kid, than you've been alive. And I'm thinking, well, I mean, you should go get that checked out. But like, looking back at, who is getting hired into the department now. And it's a 22, 24-year-old, kid that, I guess by stretch of imagination, I'm old enough to be their parent. I've, been involved in the industry longer than they have, and experience longer than they have, but, it doesn't mean they should be discounted.
No.
And
no, absolutely not. Not at all. One thing I always like is the one of the big value adds that I see from the people is have been doing this for so long, right? And I remember when I first started in the fire department, I remember this one guy getting into it real bad with this one older captain, and it was like, oh, the same thing. I've been 30 years of experience, and it was like, well, do you have 30 years of experience, or you just have 1 year of experience that you've rinsed and repeated 29 times?
Exactly. And that's a reality, absolutely. Within our industry, is that is an absolute reality, and and I think like I was a very rambunctious, not challenging younger worker, where I didn't accept the way things had always been done, or at the very least, I wanted to know why it was done that way. And then I would buy into it. Is it always? Do we always do it that way because it's worked, and this is why it's worked, or is it just because we're on autopilot here and that's it? So if there was a reason and an explanation for it, that's what I wanted to know: is what's the reason, the explanation. So yeah, I very much challenged the system, growing up, and for some people that was probably very uncomfortable. I was probably a very difficult, and still would be, a very difficult person to work with for those kind of people. If you wanted to just coast, not really know anything else, just show up, do your thing, and whatever, I would not be the person you want to be around.
Well, the cool part,
you wanted to learn, you wanted to know, you wanted to expand, challenge, fix, modify, enhance, and then go. Like, I'm the person you wanted to be around. And so, to the younger, generation and people out there, keep that. Respectfully do it and keep that drive. Find the older guy who is willing to invest the time in you, and that's what I did. Was I found the people that were willing to invest the time in me as the mentor, and clung to them because they help you succeed. Others, don't care. They just don't. But if you can find that person that does care, cling to them. And they'll help you. They'll get you there.
Oh, 100%. And one thing I really want to add on to what you said, and I think was great, was trying to find the why behind what we're doing. Are the conditions on the ground still in play on why we started doing this before? Maybe there's a great legitimate reason. And two things that I think new people really bring to the table, and then we'll go ahead and end this segment and we'll jump into our next segment, is one, by pushing those buttons and kind of asking the why behind everything, it kind of keeps us sharp. Like, okay, well, why are we doing it that way? Is there, I remember why we started doing it, but are we doing it the same way? Do we still need to do it that way? And also looking at the whole industry or any industry really, from a fresh set of eyes. It almost goes back to the lean process improvement end of it. You got somebody who, it's a fresh set of eyes. They just bring fresh perspectives and opinion. Maybe there is a much better way to do this. Maybe there's a better way to structure all of this, and I think that's a huge positive, getting that kind of feedback. And like I said, the whys kind of keep us on our toes, I think, to be honest with you, is, have conditions changed, and do we need to pivot and adjust and maybe do some things a little bit different? But with that, we're going to go ahead and wrap up this first segment of Conversations on Leadership with Dr. Dave, and we will be back with Tim, and we will be hitting our next two questions. See you in a bit. Welcome back to Conversations on Leadership with Dr. Dave. We were here with special guest Tim Nowak, and Tim, we'll get into our second question. What is one of the biggest leadership challenges you've had to face?
Yeah, as far as the challenges, I think accepting the challenges is probably one of the biggest ones that leaders need to overcome. Accept the challenge, because if you're going to do this, either do it or don't. So, if you're going to set your mind to becoming, a good leader or a good manager, then do it. And that, you're going to have to figure out kind of what your own way and style is going to be. And you can learn from other people and try to adopt some of their ways. It may not always work fully for you, but you modify. But then do it and own it. And, you're going to screw up. Own it when you screw up. You're going to succeed. Celebrate it when you succeed. But but figuring out what or who you are is, I think, kind of the challenge. And so, like, I've found most of my success as somewhat of a leader and a manager, and social media, thought leadership, and all those things. I found most of my success really in just being a bold person that asks questions and isn't afraid to kind of tackle some difficult conversation. And that's, going back to, prior segment when we talked about, when I was 20 years old, it was the same thing on a smaller scale and more local.
Right.
But it was, challenging the system. There were things that weren't working. I found efficiencies, expressed those thoughts to others. If they didn't want to listen and shut me out, I proved them wrong, and then I did it did it well. I mean, I started my company almost as a, kind of as a challenge and a failure to the system that was around. I did continued education for a long time, and the education system, the technical college system, which had a monopoly on the market, didn't want to tailor to a certain type of audience that wanted flexibility in their schedule. So I tailored to it. And when I proposed, that there was an actual market there that they could capitalize on, and I was an employee of them at the time, they didn't want to capitalize on it. So we parted ways, and then I capitalized on it. And then I took business from them and started making a name for myself. So, the challenge is trying to figure out what kind of leader you want to be. If you want to be an average one, there's nothing wrong with that. We need a lot of average leaders and average managers that do things good, do things well, repeat them, and can handle all audiences. But if you want to be one that stands out in any different area, that takes some finessing, and it takes a little bit of some guts to do it, because you may not always be accepted or welcomed with that approach, and you've got to be able to kind of handle that. And I think about, like, some of the best advice I got as I was starting to transition into a management position was from a mentor who said, "Don't do it." He said, "Don't do it." Well, but he said, "Don't do it unless you're willing to accept, the consequences, essentially, of doing it." So, like, I wanted to become a chief of a department, and he said, "Don't do it unless you're willing to lose your job tomorrow, because you get to that level of an organization, and this could be C-suite, this could be anything else. If you are relying financially, family, all that stuff, and you have no plan B, nothing else in place, you're putting everything into the one basket and hoping that this succeeds. I mean, it's okay to take some risk with that, but be fully prepared to lose your job tomorrow, because that can happen. And then now what are you going to do? You move yourself across the country. Now what are you going to do? Are you prepared to do it again? Potentially only weeks or months later or years later. So taking that risk it's a big challenge, and you have to be willing to do it and invest in it. And if you're married or whatever, have a spouse partner that's on board with it too, because it is risky. So either do it and do it 100%, or if you're going to do it 50%, that's fine, but you're probably never going to be more than a 50%er. But if you want to do it big, you got to do it big, and there's absolute risk, but there's absolute benefit as well.
100%. And one of the things I picked up on that you had mentioned, and I particularly appreciate, is the kind of the role of the contrarian in organizations and society. Okay, the person asking the whys, the person asking okay, well, everybody says, hey, this is, leaders are good, managers are bad. Well, why not say managers are good? What's the, taking that 180 approach and okay, well, no, I think it's over here. Almost kind of like the being on a college campus. I make a statement, prove me wrong, right? It's kind of like I'm inviting the argument and the discussion to hash out the ideas. So I like that quite a bit, and I think it's a more value in that than some people would ever give credit to.
Yeah, and there's a difference between being a contrarian or someone who rocks the boat, than being someone who's an ass, someone who's an Uncle
Yeah.
Frank who just stirs the pot. Stirring the pot doesn't do much good. It keeps all the same crap in the same kettle. No one likes that. It just festers it around and makes everyone angry. Rocking the boat can be okay because on occasion, the bad stuff falls overboard. It's, you recycle and replenish with good stock. So that's okay. But yeah, knowing that difference and walking that line sometimes can be a challenge where you do, if you are a boat rocker, on occasion a little bit of arrogance or whatever will get in there and you will be a little bit of an ass and that happens, humble yourself, scale it back a little bit. But then, going forward, embrace rocking that boat. And I found that a lot within, the art of consultancy is, as I've, worked with hiring on new consultants with like prior job, I was a supervisor for them. I always told, the new people or the applicants as well that, being a consultant, you've got to be very, very comfortable with working in the uncomfortable. Because that's what the entire, industry is about. Is if I go into an organization or fire department, ambulance service, and I just tell them the same stuff that they want to, they already knew, I'm not doing them any good. And I'm certainly, not giving them the best for their money.
No.
But instead, there's always something there, and there's a secret or something hidden or something that people don't talk about. They kind of deep down want to talk about it, but they don't want to bring it up. And you got to be very comfortable with having those uncomfortable conversations with people. And I've told some organizations, you're more than likely going to fail in the next 5 years. You're not going to exist. It is what it is. I can help you either transition so that this is not as big of a blow, or you can, not listen and pay attention and it's just going to hurt even more when this happens, but this is what's going to happen. And just hearing that alone for some people is not palatable. Buy it though. So,
well, I mean, like I said, you're coming in with outside expertise and you're looking at their, just, use the example of an ambulance service. You look at them and like, okay, if you keep going the way you're going, you're not going to be around, but here's some things that you can do to still be around and make some changes and actually weather the storm versus end up getting wiped out by it.
Yeah. And, if I wanted to be everyone's best friend, I would sell ice cream. So, it is what it is, and especially in this kind of world, if you want to be a high-end manager, a leader, a consultant, something in that type of space, you're not going to make everyone happy. And if you strive to make everyone happy, man, you're going to burn out so fast. This is not the right spot for you.
Well, and I think to your point on that, and I really appreciate it, it's more, what are you doing? How are you doing them a favor if you're not honest with them? And how are you doing them justice based on, let's say, kind of sugarcoating or telling them what they need to hear? Yeah, I'm a huge fan of, people learning how to communicate better and learning how to adapt their communication styles to, whatever. There's politically correct, emotionally intelligent ways to phrase things. You don't have to come in and be, like you said, a complete and total ass. When you're delivering bad news or a tough message. But on the other hand, if you're not delivering what they need to hear and you're not giving them the facts, you're doing them way much more of a disservice than to try to be their friend.
Yeah. So, there's absolutely an element of tact that needs to be in place there, and emotional intelligence and transparently, I lack that on decent occasion. The transparency and the bluntness in me, professionally at least, comes through more than the emotional intelligence side does. But also at the same time, and to that respect, quoting the great philosopher Mike Tyson, everyone has a plan until they get punched in the face. And I find this a lot within our the fire and EMS industry is, we use the word crisis quite a bit. We use it to exploit our industry so that we can get more money because, seconds count and all that other crap we tell people. But we also, when it's turned on us and when we say, like, we're in crisis, we can't get people, we need funding, we're going to fall apart. You can't be in a crisis mode and have your feelings matter anymore, because now if you're in crisis mode, like, stuff's got to get done, whether
Yeah.
you kind of like it or not, or are comfortable with it or not. And so sometimes people just outright need to be punched in the face in order for this to really resonate and sit, that things are indeed this bad, that you're going to have to shut your doors, and you're going to, as a result, you will have failed other people because of this action or inaction. And some people just outright need to hear that.
Yeah, I think if you don't get their attention, however you do it, I mean, so if you're not, they're not going to make a change unless it's, like you said, and I bet sometimes they say they're in crisis and you get there and you look at it, it's probably, okay, it's not as bad as, like I said, you can't say you're in crisis, but I want to control how everything gets done. Mm-hmm. Well, I said that ship sailed. Yeah. It's a true crisis. Maybe it's not as big of a crisis as you're saying that it is. Or, like I said, hey, you need this massive, ice bucket challenge style wake up call to say, hey, we've got to do something right now. Or, like I said, you're going to shut the doors and a lot of people are not going to have jobs.
Yeah. Yeah. And so, it's an uncomfortable place to be in. And you, as the manager, or as the role as a leader, part of leadership, is letting go, at the time where you need to. And, it kind of is what it is. And, companies face this with layoffs, or they face it with downsizing and whatever. Sometimes, you have to let go, X percentage or X element, in order for the other areas to regroup, thrive again, succeed, and then rebuild. You need to kind of start over. So, every situation, yes, there's context and there's differences between them. But this is not comfortable. This is not a comfortable area. And this is an area that people make mistakes in, is trying to appease everyone. Being a leader is not about appeasing everyone. It's more about, being accountable and doing and acting and showing. And sometimes that involves uncomfortable things. You can be a leader while still disciplining an employee that deserves to be disciplined. That is still leadership. Someone has to teach them and show them that this was not acceptable. You did this. There's a consequence for it. Here's how you get back in good graces. And then you accept them, when they, pay their dues. Like that is also good leadership. Good leadership is disciplining.
Oh, yeah.
So, yeah.
Oh, 100%. Well, something you said, it kind of takes us right into the next question, but what do you think is one of the biggest mistakes that leaders make today?
Yeah. And I think that the lack of accountability and for yourself, but then also for your followers. There's an element of accountability and then, responsibility there that's got to be put into play. If you're responsible to do something, you need to do it. If you're accountable to oversee something, then make sure that whoever's responsible does what they are supposed to do. And leadership is more than just a metaphor. Like I said, good managers are good leaders. So manage and do it well, and that will lead to good leadership.
Cool. Well, I wanted to follow up with you on that. I had a couple of things that I wanted to kind of tie in and ask. You talked about the accountability. One, from an organizational culture standpoint, I've heard, a lot of different definitions. I mean, it's like leadership. You could, ask 100 people, get 100 different definitions. But one that I heard was basically culture is what you will accept and tolerate. Yeah. And so that's one of them. And I talk on that, and also talk on the fact of when you have people that don't want to manage properly, they don't want to hold people accountable, and you got the toxic employee or the bad employee, the guy that's getting away with murder. what kind of effect that ends up having on the good people,
Yeah.
and then the downstream effects of that.
Yeah, no, I would agree. There's an element of, what you're willing to accept is becomes the culture of the organization. And so, yes, I would agree for the most part with that statement that's fair. Walking into different organizations and departments that have awesome, wonderful cultures, even despite being kind of crappy conditions, it's because people pushed through and, still expected that positive to be there. Whereas when you've got all intents and purposes and rights to be a positive organization, but your culture sucks, it's because people have allowed that and embraced it and continued it, and that cancer hasn't been rid from the organization. So yeah, I would support that. What was the next point?
The next one, and I'll expand on it again. It's kind of like if you have a toxic employee or a toxic leader or something like that, it's kind of like, okay, well, Joe's over there getting away with murder. Why am I busting my hump?
Yep.
And then a lot of times when you get rid of them, it's like this massive weight, like, oh, we should have done that a year ago.
Yeah. And I think something in the industry that concerns me a little bit, and perhaps I don't understand the concepts of all of it fully. So if I don't, I'll apologize and redact or whatever from there. But this whole thing of just culture within the industry that we're seeing, as I've seen it and as I've experienced it, is a bunch of bullshit. And I say that because it lacks accountability. It places the blame on the system or the processes. But every other time that I've done a risk assessment or root cause analysis as a result of just culture, blah, blah stuff, the part that is lacking at the end of it is, okay, what are we going to do and who is going to do it or oversee it or something? There's that missing component. And just culture, in my experience and how I've experienced it again, which could be maybe just the wrong way, grossly fails in that element. And so, to me, it's become something where, and I saw this with an organization I went to and worked at a little bit ago. They emphasized just culture, whatever. And I was kind of going into it and thinking, positive. But after having had it reconfirmed in an organization across the country, that this is indeed what just culture is, that to me is now a red flag. If I see an organization that says, oh, we are a just culture place, that's an absolute red flag. I will not work for you. And in fact, I'll probably even fight back and say, let's talk about this, because humor me on what would you do in these situations,
Exactly. And for those who don't know I know what you're talking about, but for those who maybe listeners who don't know what you mean by just culture and that type of environment, just briefly explain what just culture is, and then basically kind of here's how it was before, and here's the damage from that.
Again, as I've seen and experienced it, it's something happened, an event happened, whether it's a critical event or whatever, something happened, so we need to figure out what the cause was. And
somebody made a mistake, gave a wrong drug, somebody got hurt,
or whatever it was. So, dig into a root cause analysis. What caused this? What really caused this? And I don't think that they dig far enough into the root in this process, because that means that likely somebody's to blame for it, and no one wants to name names. So just culture, at least again in my experience, tries to figure out what happened, but the blame for problems, or blame's a bad word. It's not used in that area. The reason for this problem is because of the system. The system failed the person. The system should have had more checks and balances. The system should have had more safeguards. Even though, this was in a locked box with a code and then needed a key and a second person, somebody still gave this medication inappropriately. The system failed them. Again, that's been my experience with it. And it's just a horrible load of crap, and it's killing the industry and people, for that matter. Again, this is my experience and my perspective, and if I'm
I've seen that to a certain extent as well. And I mean, it's it kind of takes the human element out of it. That okay, people are people. I mean, you could put every safeguard into place. People are still going to, you're never going to cure stupid.
Yeah.
Right. It's just people having a bad day. They make a bad decision. They're tired. They're fatigued. Something.
And still to that point, there's a human element. Somebody did something, and if the person screwed up, because the person indeed screwed up, actively ignored the safeguards, actively made workarounds, actively did these things, the person screwed up. The system didn't screw up. The person did. So the person needs to be held accountable. And so I think there's and I don't know if the authors intended this or not, but I think there's a fundamental difference between extreme ownership and just culture. And, with extreme ownership, it's more based on like, yes, someone is accountable. And at the end of the day, if no one's claiming accountability, then I, as the boss, am accountable. And I will be accountable to fix this. And it might be uncomfortable for some people. But at the end of the day, there's a problem. It caused this reaction. We don't want this to happen again. If you, as subordinates, aren't going to own to it, then I will. And I am going to fix it. And I'm going to, maintain accountability for the success or failure of it too. But I'm going to fix it. And this is what I'm going to do. And so, it's okay to put blame or responsibility or accountability on people and not just, making them feel good and no one's really in trouble. And no, you screwed up. You are indeed in trouble. This is, make no doubt about it, this is a disciplinary conversation. People need to hear that when that's appropriate. And now we're starting to see stuff in court. But, the system failed them. No, they screwed up big. And they circumvented the system to do it.
Yeah. And one thing that I've always noticed too is, to a certain degree, and I'm using this in the OSHA kind of standpoint, you can almost over safeguard something. You put so many safeguards in place that you just eliminate your efficiency. And it's just like, okay, now you're making it so hard for me to do my job that it's just got to the point of being sometimes beyond ridiculous.
Yeah.
And like I said, well-intended, but like anything else can just grow and grow and grow and grow. And like I said, do you have to, maybe the culture for EMS was, okay, medic makes one mistake, figuratively speaking, of course, what did we used to do, figuratively take him out in the middle of the town square and empty a disciplinary clip into him, right? You know what I mean? But you're done, your career's done, your license is done, you're at it, for one stupid mistake. Unfortunately, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, I got a feeling that kind of where some of the just culture is too far of the pendulum swinging the opposite direction. Like, this is not good. Okay, just going out and for the slightest mistake, the rest of your career and your life is ruined.
Exactly.
And there's no redemption at all. But on the other hand, hey, nobody's ever done anything wrong. It's just we didn't put the label wasn't big enough, or we need to color the epi bottles yellow now. Yeah. So whatever. I mean,
yeah, and that's exactly right. It's a pendulum problem where the past, the 80s and 90s is way over here. Way over here is just culture. And in the middle is likely where we need to be. And, what I resonate with extreme ownership is that, okay, if the system indeed failed, and that's okay, like if the system indeed failed, the next step is then assigning who is going to fix it. Who's going to be responsible and accountable for fixing it. No one else raises their hand, it's going to go to the boss. So, okay, the system failed, the label should have been bigger. I'm going to be responsible for making sure that the label is bigger. And then you're going to be responsible for making sure that you read this and you did this part and you follow these steps, because the label is now bigger. You can see it. It's there. And if you circumnavigate this, find a workaround, whatever, then there's going to be consequences.
Yeah, it shouldn't have to get to the point where, and we'll end the segment with this, and we'll come back for our last segment with our last question, but it shouldn't have to get to the fact that now I have to put a pair of reading glasses into every drug box because somebody didn't take the time to look at it enough and, hey, there's a you needed to grab the epi with the extra zero on the end, right? The 1 to 10,000, not the 1 to 1,000
Yeah.
or whatever, right? It's like, it shouldn't just get to the point where, well, the system failed them because the print was too small from the manufacturer. Well, you can't put a label this big on a bottle that big.
Yeah, but you can make a label and put that vial in a bag, which I did with the system, and got shot down because it was too much of a change. But made a system, built the system in place so that everything had a large label. Medication dosages were spelled out, pediatric dosages were spelled out on the container itself. So made the safeguard, built it in place. Put a 2-step process, so you had to open this and then open that, and here's all the stuff you need for it, and shot down because it was too much change. Well, there you go.
Well, when you have a big mistake, and we'll end it on this, sometimes when you have the way you prevent it from happening again or lessen the likelihood of happening again is you have to have a drastic change. If you keep up with the same old, eventually you're going to get the same result.
Exactly.
The same mistakes. And you're right. And it may be a drastic change. It may be something, hey, we're not happy about this change, but guess what? If you don't make a change, then nothing's going to change. The same thing's going to happen again. Yep. But it's a great place to wrap up this segment of Conversations on Leadership with Dr. Dave, but we will come back for our final question and wrap up in just a bit. Welcome back to our final segment of Conversations on Leadership with Dr. Dave. And we're here finished up with Tim Nowak. So, Tim, what do you think is the best way for leaders to improve their leadership skills?
Yeah, I think there's a lot more action that has to get taken. So I'll throw this out there, and I'll say,
please do.
Yeah, I'll say stop reading. Now I don't like fully mean that, but there's still an element of you have to do this stuff now. And if all you're going to do is just read about it and then read some more and then get into analysis paralysis and whatever, be educated, absolutely, and learn about different things, read different thought processes, see what's going to work for you, absolutely. But at some point in time, you need to do it. And,
yes,
there's always a debate, especially within, manufacturing worlds of, okay, do you introduce a minimally viable product, or do you try to perfect things and then roll out with the perfection? Every industry is going to be a little bit different. Every circumstances are a little bit different. So, there's no good answer necessarily on that. And I think, there's a healthy balance in between here with leadership and management, for that matter, of do some research, learn, keep track of what you've seen, what other people have done, what worked for you, what didn't work for you, who was a good leader, a good mentor, and who was not. Learn from them as well. But then at some point in time, you got to start. And if all you do is just become a leadership academic, I mean, it's good and great, but no one literally is benefiting from it if you don't actually start to do it. So at some point in time, you got to stop reading and start doing some stuff.
Well, that's where I kind of like the contrarian point of view, because you get people's attention.
Yeah.
Hey, everybody tells you to, leaders are readers, but hey, I'm telling you to stop reading. And people are like, what are you talking about? But then when you explain it, it's no different than put it back into a clinical perspective. Mm-hmm. Okay. You can go to all the paramedic school, nursing school, whatever. But at some point, if you're not out actually starting IVs, pushing medications, intubating people, if you're not doing the skills, you're never going to actually, that takes the learning to the different level. I remember we were in the fire academy, about halfway through, we finally got to the point, they were like, hey, if we don't go out to one of these, out to the burn building and actually do something with this stuff, right, we're going to burn this place down, right?
Yeah.
You can't keep teaching us how to do it and not doing it. And I think, unfortunately, that doesn't happen a lot, or as often as it should, a lot of times in organizations with leadership programs. So, we'll send you this course, we'll give you this training, we'll do this stuff, but what are the tasks that you're giving them? Lower level stuff that's not going to bankrupt the company or completely, stifle the organization into non-existence. But what kind of things are you giving them so they can practice and get better? Because if you don't do it, you can only learn a certain much by just, like I said, the reading. But part of the learning process is the application and then reiteration. All right, that worked. That didn't work.
Yeah.
So I agree with you 100%.
Yeah, and like for like firefighters, for example, There's leadership and experience that can be gained through having, fighting a lot of fires. But let's face it, this isn't the 70s and the 80s anymore. Starting your own fire is typically frowned upon. So
yes, quite a bit. That's why we created burn buildings,
yeah,
so you
yeah.
could kind
So don't do that. So then, okay, you've got to rely to some extent on theory and prior knowledge and pass down, information to develop, some leadership and tactical action styles. But just because you have to rely on some of that theory doesn't mean you can't start putting some of it into practice with burn building, with company drills or whatever.
exactly.
So exactly that. Like if all you are is a textbook person, and I've seen this too with EMS, education programs. Some educators who probably are still good, but some of them legitimately have no field experience. And I can think of one that was one of my educators, did not have much field experience, but was known as a good educator. And there's an element of respect that is lost there. And once you start to experience things, and then it starts to contradict what they're saying. Well, what's going to win, the actual experience or the theory of the experience? So it makes things complicated when you don't have some experience. And I see this even within like consultancy. There's an element of respect that is gained once someone actually, reaches the title of chief, specifically chief.
Right.
It helps out quite a bit. And that's, I think EMS industry kind of fails in the sense where we still call ourselves managers and directors and supervisors and whatever. I think we need to transition toward the terms chief, because there's an element of respect that exists when we, call ourselves chief. So, with that, having some of that experience, there's street credibility that goes with it, because you actually did it, not just got a certification and learned about it or whatever. That's all still good. You likely need that, but once you bear that burden, you kind of broke bread with others on it. There's a different element that's there, and that's what I think. That's what leaders need to help improve their skills. Is you got to start doing it.
I'm with you 100%. A couple things that, and then we'll wrap up. But I remember helping out with the paramedic program when I first started, and because I wanted to get my fingers in it, and one of the reasons I did is because one of my mentors, that I still think is probably one of the best medics I've ever had any dealings with at all, he was phenomenal, and he was one of our instructors, and taught a lot of EMT stuff, did a lot of stuff with the paramedic program. And I asked him one time, because, being young and stupid and a lot less filters than I have now, probably banking a 0 in emotional intelligence at the time. But, you say something stupid, and there is some, truth to this, those who can do, those who can't teach. And so I mentioned it, and he was like, well, obviously he had proven that he could do, from riding, precept time with him and stuff like that, and just in general. But he's like, the reason I want to continue to be the best in my industry, so that's why I teach.
Yeah.
He said, it forces me to stay current trends. It's not the 1 year of training or 2 years of training, rinse and repeat. It's the, hey, I'm constantly in the new stuff. I'm constantly seeing what's coming down the pike. I'm in all these meetings with all this, these committees where, hey, I know where ACLS is going with their heart association is going with their new changes, or PALS, or, whatever the organization is. He's like, I teach so I can stay at the top of my game clinically and in the field. And so it was wild, because, having that kind of experience when I first started really put a different mindset on education to me. But I have seen folks, just like you said, that were 0 field experience. And like I said, when it came to the point of, but then, like I said, this is a whole lot more, like I said, their mouth writes checks that their, a skill level and hind parts can't cash when it comes to that stuff. And one of the best experiences I had starting out was helping out with a paramedic refresher class. And it was extraordinarily intimidating the first time, because you're thinking, okay, I've been doing this for 2 years. These guys have been doing it for 20 some, what am I bringing value wise? But just the value was just helping to facilitate the conversations around the material and just soak up these guys' experience. And that was just, I mean, that was game changing for me.
Yeah.
Was phenomenal to really soak that up. But you're right, just getting out there. And I don't think we do the same thing with leaders and leadership development programs in organizations as far as the getting the practice, the doing the, getting the projects, getting your feet wet is probably should.
Yeah. Yeah. No, certainly. And, again, speaking in generalities, this doesn't apply to everyone. But there are certainly instances where it does. And,
they don't do the industry a lot of favors. Let's just put it that way.
Yeah. It doesn't. So if you want to do this, you got to do it. And, it doesn't mean you got to become a manager, director, whatever. You can still manage and lead as the bottom person on the totem pole. But start doing it. There's bottom up leadership and there's top down leadership. So just start doing it.
Exactly. It's kind of going to the old Maxwell thing, and then we'll wrap up here. The leadership being influence, and I mean, one of the things I like about is that leadership component in a paramedic program. Like, hey, you're the highest certified, highest licensed person on scene. People are gonna be looking to you, and if you're losing your stuff over some kind of call, everyone's gonna lose theirs too. And you got a Cessna into a nursing home kind of thing, mass casualty, and you look like you're cool as a cucumber, and everybody's like, they're like, hey, yeah, we do this every day. And you're like, oh well, Tim's not flipping out or Dave's not flipping out, so okay, well maybe it's not as big of a deal as I think it is. So I like the leadership component built into just the training in general. Like I said, you're just frontline staff. Mm-hmm. But there's that big leadership component to it. So tell our listeners how they can connect with you, your consultancy company. If you got a book website, connect to you on LinkedIn. You're like, man, I like this Tim guy. How do I contact him, get in touch with him? How am I get me some more of this Tim guy and reach out?
No, and I appreciate that. The best way to find me, quite honestly, is on LinkedIn. I do everything on there. I've gotten rid of company website, and I just do, company website or page on LinkedIn. Engage on there very regularly, have a great following, great connections, especially within my industry. That's where you can find me. And, follow with the discussions and the engagement. Find me on LinkedIn.
Cool deal. We'll have the link to your LinkedIn profile in the description. And I would encourage everybody to reach out and connect with Tim on LinkedIn. Like I said, I appreciate your material, and I see it all the time. And it is nice to see every once in a while somebody throwing a monkey wrench into the works just to get the conversation going.
Yeah, and
I like your rocking the boat versus stirring the pot analogy. I like that a lot. I have to borrow that one.
And I've over time, like I become more engaged in the discussion now in the past probably 2 years. But when I originally started engaging on LinkedIn, I a lot of times would just ask the question and then step back because no one wanted to ask the question, but they certainly wanted to talk about it. They just didn't want to be that first person to broach the topic. And now. Now I'm glad to jump and engage in the conversation and fight a little bit too if I have to. But yeah, so someone's got to start. And for the longest time, I just started and let people talk, and then I learned from it too. I mean, that was the whole reason why I got on LinkedIn was I asked questions because I had questions. I didn't have any of the answers, so I had other people answer it for me, and I just learned from that. And now, 10 years later. The tides are changed a bit where people are coming to me asking the question and looking for my answer. Like, that's pretty cool.
Yeah. No, like I said, is when you kind of get to that point in your career, you're like, okay, well, things have shifted a little bit. That's very cool. So yeah, I would absolutely encourage everybody to connect with Tim on LinkedIn, and we will see you guys next week on Conversations on Leadership with Dr. Dave. Take care.